My name is Mia Wilson. I'm 37, a general surgeon, and the mother of a bright, loud, and occasionally exasperating 12-year-old named Mason. Most of my life has been about showing up, keeping quiet, and fixing the chaos everyone else seems to leave behind. Not the genius, not the screw-up, not the dramatic one. I'm the steady hand, the one who moves silently through the room, notices everything, and bears the weight without complaint. I grew up in a small apartment where you could hear the neighbors' every sneeze. My mother, Carol Wilson, managed the household with subtle manipulation masked as concern. My father, Richard Wilson, charming, smiling, and slightly smug, always reminded us that family first was more than a phrase, it was a command. And my younger sister, April, she was the golden child, the one the world seemed to revolve around without question. Big eyes, soft voice, adults swooning over her every whim. Me? I learned early that being competent was not the same as being seen. My work as a surgeon isn't the heroics people imagine. There's no dramatic flair, just alarms at ungodly hours, hands that know exactly where to cut, and endless quiet decisions that determine whether someone lives or dies. Money is similar. I don't talk about it, not because I'm ashamed, but because in my family, numbers turn into obligations. If I have, I'm expected to give. If I don't, I'm ungrateful. So I say nothing. Even when my private clinic rotation brought in close to $30,000 a month, I simply tell Mason, I fix bellies. That's my job. I come home in one piece. That's all. Mason, bless him, has zero poker face. A literal child with a loud laugh who blurts what he thinks. Carol loves that. She crouches to his height, eyes wide with a smile that seems generous until you catch the edge in her tone. Tell me everything, sweetheart. Your mom eats, your mom sleeps, your mom keeps secrets. And Mason shifts, deflects, mutters something innocuous, and she presses on. This year, their anniversary dinner arrived as usual. White tablecloths, candlelight, soft orchestral music in the background. April was snapping pictures like a paparazzo. Richard had already begun his second glass of wine. Carol wore a shimmering dress, her smile like a scene from a movie, teeth too perfect. I stayed quiet, Mason by my side, pretending to study the menu as if it were a treasure map. The check came. I placed my card on top. That's when Carol leaned toward Mason, her voice silky. Is your mom still underpaid at the hospital? Mason blinked, glanced at me, and said, I don't know money stuff. Carol pressed, eyes sparkling with expectation. Ballpark. Grandma won't tell. Mason flushed. I had seen the email once. $30,000. April gasped. Richard set his glass down too hard. 30? He muttered, tasting the number like it was exotic. Heat rose in my throat. Mason, I said gently, you don't have to. Carol's hand slid under the black leather folder, lifting my card with a tiny wink. Just one small bill, she whispered. A silly thing. Help for April. Family first. I exhaled silently, letting the scene roll over me. I said nothing. Not then. Dessert came. Photos were taken. Smiles exchanged. I kissed Mason goodnight and went home, the first bank alert arriving at 12:11 a.m. $38,000 missing. It wasn't theft, it was a drip. A slow, methodical extraction that had been years in the making. My family had been quietly conditioning me to absorb their needs, to be the vessel for their entitlement. Carol's whispers, April's manipulations, Richard's charm, it all converged at a single point, and now the numbers scream the truth. I laid in bed, Mason asleep beside me, mouth open, hair matted. I whispered, I'm sorry for tonight, to a child who couldn't hear me, not for the money, but for letting him be dragged into adult manipulation. My mind ran through years of silent service, covering bills, co-signing leases, paying debts that weren't mine, absorbing promises that never materialized. This was the culmination of decades of learned behavior, that silence equals peace, that competence equals duty, that being useful was more important than being human. And now, faced with a literal crater in my bank account, I knew one thing. This could not continue. Tomorrow, I would do something. Not dramatic, not angry, not vengeful. Something clean, final, and quiet. Boundaries would be drawn. A line would be set. Family first would no longer mean family above all reason. For now, I let the tension settle around me like a thick fog, aware that my quiet life, my carefully built routines, and my son's safety hung in the balance. Foreshadowing whispered in every corner, tomorrow, nothing would be the same. Mia Wilson woke the next morning to a quiet house. Mason had already left for school, backpack bouncing behind him as he waved goodbye. The living room smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic, the remnants of late-night planning settling like dust. I brewed a cup and stared out the window at the falling leaves, thinking about the $38,000 that had slipped through my hands without a sound. It wasn't just money, it was trust, respect, and the invisible chain of obligation I had been wearing my whole life. Growing up, I had learned that silence could be interpreted as complicity. My mother's subtle manipulations, my father's charming approvals, and April's effortless demands were a perfect storm. I had absorbed every expectation, every slight, every family-first mantra, and carried it like a backpack full of stones. I remembered long nights as a teenager, curled up on the worn couch, counting every cent I earned from tutoring and part-time jobs, while April's room overflowed with gifts, new books, and dreams she hadn't yet earned. I had been the responsible one, the fix-it, the silent laborer. April had been the golden child, untouchable, shielded by parents who interpreted her fragility as virtue, and I had learned early that being competent meant being invisible. Years later, the pattern persisted. I worked double shifts, volunteered for extra rotations at the clinic, and kept meticulous savings, all so Mason could have stability, so I could carve a life outside my parents' reach. My own enjoyment, sleep, vacations, small luxuries, was secondary, postponed indefinitely. I was careful, private. Numbers never spoken, never flaunted, because in my family, any hint of abundance demanded extraction. And yet, despite all my precautions, Mason's literal honesty had betrayed me. A casual glance at my phone, a child's innocent blurting, had unleashed a tidal wave. My mother, Carol, had seized the opportunity, lifted my card, and quietly funneled money to April's whims. By midnight, it wasn't just a small amount, it was a crater in my accounts, one that revealed years of family entitlement. I remembered how the requests had always started small, co-signing a lease, covering a utility bill, an advance for school fees. Each ask framed as temporary, minor, necessary. Each one normalized over time until I was the person who carried the family as if that were love. But love, I had learned, had limits. And my patience, like my finances, had a line. Mia Wilson, the responsible one, felt a slow burn of anger, but more importantly, clarity. The crisis forced reflection. How many times had I paused my life for someone else's gain? How many times had I ignored my own needs to satisfy their unspoken expectations? I thought of Mason, the bright boy who trusted me to navigate the world with steady hands. How could I allow him to see exploitation disguised as love? The morning stretched into the afternoon. Calls and texts from Carol and April had already begun, a soft barrage of guilt, manipulation, and justification. Carol's voice messages, polite yet pressing, pleaded with subtle venom. Mia, this is just a small payment. You know it's for April's future. April's texts alternated between crying emojis and feigned helplessness. Mom says you're cruel. Can't you just help me? I'll pay you back, I promise. I let them pile up. I did not respond. Every ping on my phone felt like a test, a reminder of all the times I had silently absorbed their demands. I sipped coffee and watched the sunlight shift across the walls. I considered my own life, my own family, Mason, my routines, my independence. For the first time in decades, I understood that boundaries were not betrayal, and that saying no could be a form of protection, not punishment. Flashbacks came in fragments. The evenings I had nursed a sick Mason through fever while the family argued over utility bills, the times I had juggled extra shifts to ensure April's whims were funded, the countless nights of calculation and sacrifice to shield myself and Mason from financial chaos. Every sacrifice, every quiet act of responsibility had been a preparation for this moment. And now the moment had arrived. The question was no longer whether I would respond, but how I would respond. I made a list, not on paper but in my mind. Step 1. Do not engage in emotional negotiations with Carol or April. Step 2. Protect Mason from being interrogated about finances. Step 3. Isolate my accounts. Separate savings. Secure the future. Step 4. Prepare for confrontation with clarity, not anger. It was a plan, methodical and quiet. Unlike the chaos my family thrived on, my response would be clean, deliberate, and unassailable. By evening, I checked my accounts again. The numbers made my chest tighten. Pending transactions, transfers, small withdrawals, but all under names I recognized. April, Carol. Familiar hands using my trust as a springboard. The realization was bitter but clarifying. My family would push as far as I allowed them to push. And so far, I had allowed far too much. I walked through the apartment, Mason drawing at the kitchen table, oblivious to the storm. I watched him, the anchor of my life, and felt a surge of protective clarity. This wasn't about money. It was about power, respect, and the right to say no without guilt. That night, as I prepared for bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a seed of determination. The quiet provider, Mia Wilson, was ready to step out of the shadows. Tomorrow, I would draw the lines. I would act. I would reclaim control of my life, my finances, and my family's expectations. For now, I sipped tea, Mason's soft breathing filling the room, and let the tension settle. Tomorrow would mark the start of boundaries, clarity, and inevitable confrontation. The storm was coming, but for the first time, I was ready to face it head on. The next morning, I woke early, the sunlight spilling across the floor like a spotlight on what had to be done. Mason was still asleep, his small chest rising and falling, unaware of the financial storm that had erupted around us. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and reviewed my plan. Every word I would say, every boundary I would enforce, had to be precise. No hesitation, no guilt. Oh. By 7:00 a.m., I sent the first message, a single, clear note to my family group. Starting today, 1. I do not lend or share cards. 2. I do not co-sign or guarantee debts. 3. I do not pay other people's obligations. 4. Do not ask Mason about money. 5. If you need help, I define it and set the terms. Unauthorized charges will be reported. 9 minutes passed. Then the flood began. Messages, calls, pleading, guilt trips. Mia, it's just a small payment. You've always been there before. Don't abandon me now. April might be homeless. My phone buzzed like a jackhammer, but I let it ring. By 8:30 a.m., I was calm, almost eerily so. The anger had settled into something sharper. Clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was closure. At noon, I drove to my parents' apartment. Mason was safely with a friend, homework abandoned for the day. I didn't want him in the middle of this. Carol met me at the door with her usual tight-lipped smile, spreadsheet in hand. Richard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. April, disheveled from too little sleep and too much anxiety, hovered near the window. Sit, Carol said, as if she were still in charge of the room. I didn't. I stood, letting the tension fill the space. You cover this and we make a plan, Carol began, pushing her spreadsheet toward me. We're a team. Reduce discretionary spending. What discretionary spending? I interrupted, voice steady. I operate 60 hours a week. Sleep is a luxury. Coffee is my only indulgence. I have nothing discretionary to cut. Richard clicked his tongue, trying to assert authority. Enough drama. Cover the hole and move on. The hole? I repeated, voice quiet but sharp. It's not a hole. It's a pit. $38,000. And it's not mine to cover. Carol laughed sharply, her eyes narrowing. It was a family loan, a small one, for April. No, I said, hands steady. It's abuse, and I won't allow it anymore. Mason is not a financial spy for this family. My accounts are off limits. My cards are not toys. My money is not your safety net. April's eyes widened, panic and disbelief colliding. But I'll be on the street. I don't know what to do. You can stay with me for 2 weeks, I said, cool and measured. I will help you budget. I will show you how to apply for jobs, manage rent, utilities, and food. But my accounts are closed to you. Your future depends on your own responsibility, not my guilt. The room fell silent. Carol pinched her lips. Richard's smirk faded into something resembling frustration. You need to check your heart, Carol said, voice soft but accusatory. You're bitter. This isn't love. I held her stare. This isn't about revenge, it's about closure. Boundaries are not betrayal, they are protection. My family now consists of Mason and me. That's it, from now on. I left the apartment with the same quiet resolve I had always carried, but this time it wasn't weighed down by obligation. I returned home, locked every card, froze accounts, and separated my finances into independent streams: wages, savings, Mason's future fund. One thing, clean and clear. Mason came home that afternoon, backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes wide. "What's happening?" he asked. "Boundaries," I said simply. "We protect what's ours, and sometimes that means saying no, even to people who say they love you." He nodded, understanding in the way only a child can, and for the first time I felt the weight lifting, not fully gone, but manageable. I had drawn the line, I had spoken it, enforced it, and survived the storm of guilt and resistance. That evening, April arrived at my door, backpack in tow, eyeliner smudged, hair a messy knot. "Can I stay 2 weeks?" she asked, voice low. No theatrics, no dramatic plea. "Yes," I said, "but there are conditions. Phone off at 10, no online shopping. Tomorrow you go to the front desk interview. We stick to the plan." She nodded, tears in her eyes, relief washing over her. For the first time, she would face the consequences of her choices, and I would no longer be her escape hatch. That night, I sipped tea while Mason finished his homework, watching him, listening to the quiet hum of life continuing. For the first time in years, I felt something I had long forgotten: control. The following morning, the apartment felt calmer than it had in months. Mason ate his breakfast, humming softly, while I reviewed April's spreadsheet with her. The numbers were simple, but for her, every figure carried weight. Rent, utilities, food, transportation, things she had never truly accounted for. "You see," I said gently, pointing to her monthly balance. "These aren't wishes. These are reality. Your income goes here, expenses here. If it doesn't fit, you adjust. Not with guilt, not by asking me to cover it." April's shoulders sagged, the weight of independence sinking in. She wiped smudged eyeliner from her cheeks and nodded. I didn't think I could do it on my own." "Yes," I said, keeping my tone firm but not cruel. "That's exactly why you need to. Life doesn't wait for comfort, and neither do bills. You'll learn faster if you own your responsibilities." The next few days were intense but productive. I helped April schedule interviews, set up email alerts for bills, and even role-played conversations with landlords. Every task was a lesson in self-reliance. She resisted at first, small protests spilling out in tired sighs and panicked questions. "What if I can't pay this month?" "You figure it out," I replied steady. "I'll guide you, not bail you out. This is about learning to swim, not floating on someone else's paycheck." Meanwhile, Carol and Richard's messages persisted, though they had toned down slightly. Carol sent health updates, small medical readings, and passive reminders about family obligations. Richard's attempts at manipulation were subtler. Comments about legacy, generosity, and family loyalty slipped into casual conversation. I responded only when necessary, always measured, always reinforcing boundaries. "Go to urgent care if you feel unwell. I will not discuss money with Mason. My accounts are off limits." Short, clear, non-negotiable. The change wasn't immediate. April struggled, slipping into old habits of asking for help or exaggerating crises. Each time I reminded her, "This is your responsibility. You define your limits, not me." By the end of the second week, the transformation was visible. April had secured a small apartment. Her first paycheck reflected careful budgeting, and she had begun to understand the relationship between income and independence. She still looked exhausted at times, but there was pride in her movements, a subtle confidence that hadn't existed before. Mason, observing quietly, absorbed every lesson differently. He learned that boundaries weren't punishment, they were protection. That strength didn't always come from bending, giving, or sacrificing. It sometimes came from saying no, standing firm, and letting others face the consequences of their choices. Evenings became peaceful. I cooked meals, Mason helped where he could, and April began contributing meaningfully without relying on my finances. Conversations revolved around daily life, science homework, grocery lists, small victories, rather than crises and guilt. One evening, as the three of us sat around the table, April looked at me and said softly, Thank you for not just giving me money." I nodded, feeling a quiet warmth. "I'm helping you build something that money can't buy. Your independence. That's worth more than any transfer or loan." Meanwhile, my relationship with Carol and Richard remained strained but clearer. They tested boundaries subtly, but each time I responded with consistency. I realized that change wouldn't come from confrontation alone. It required steadfast enforcement of limits and consistent communication. By the third week, I noticed an unexpected effect. The tension I had carried for years, silent burdens, constant pressure, invisible obligations, began to lift. Mason laughed more freely. I slept deeper, and even April, under the constraints of her own accountability, began to thrive. It was a slow process, but every small step reinforced the truth I had finally accepted. Love isn't measured by sacrifice or silent compliance. It's measured by respect, boundaries, and the ability to protect those you care about while still living fully yourself. The apartment, once a quiet battlefield of obligations and guilt, now felt like a home. Safe, predictable, balanced. I could breathe again. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a provider. I was Mia Wilson, mother, sister, daughter, and guardian of my own life. And with every passing day, the lesson became clearer. Boundaries were not betrayal, control was not selfishness. And finally, I had the right to define my family as the people who respected me, my child, and the life I was building. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of our new life settled into something steady, almost serene. Mason's laughter filled the apartment in a way it hadn't before. April's texts became less frantic, more practical, and she learned to celebrate her own small victories. And I, Mia Wilson, 37, mother and surgeon, finally felt the weight of invisible obligations lift from my shoulders. The family group chat remained muted for the most part. Carol continued sending health updates and casual messages, but without the undertone of manipulation. Richard occasionally tried to probe, subtly, with reminders of family first or generosity, but I had learned the art of silent enforcement. My responses were calm, measured, and uncompromising. Boundaries weren't just lines on paper, they were walls of protection I no longer wavered from. One quiet Saturday, April stopped by with her first official paycheck in hand. She handed it to me, almost sheepishly. "I balanced everything," she said. "Rent, utilities, groceries. I actually did it." I smiled, genuinely proud. "Good. This is your life now. You built it yourself." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Do you forgive me?" I studied her. The question wasn't about money. It was about trust, respect, and maturity. "I never held a grudge," I said. "I just needed you to learn responsibility. That's what matters. You've done that. I'm proud of you." That afternoon, Mason bounded into the living room, carrying a drawing he had made in school. Two stick figures stood beside a giant key, one smaller than the other. "What's this?" I asked. "It's us," he said, grinning. "The key is boundaries. You said it keeps us safe." I hugged him, feeling a swell of quiet triumph. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I was raising my son in a home defined by respect, love, and clarity, not obligation and hidden resentment. The changes extended to Carol and Richard as well. Without access to my finances, they had to navigate their own responsibilities. Slowly, I noticed less drama, fewer manipulative texts, and even a subtle acknowledgement of my autonomy. Carol posted a family photo on social media, her hand resting on Richard's, but it was harmless. No veiled expectations, no silent demands. I kept up my routines, hospital rotations, surgeries, quiet nights with Mason, but now they were my routines, not extensions of my family's leverage. I was still Mia Wilson, competent, steady, and caring. But I was also unapologetically my own person, no longer weighed down by invisible debts or unspoken obligations. One evening, Mason and I watched a silly movie, our apartment warm and quiet. April had returned to her apartment, managing her life independently. I realized the truth I had been chasing all along. Love doesn't demand sacrifice at the expense of your soul. Love thrives with boundaries. Respect fosters growth, and sometimes the hardest thing you can do is say no. Later, I checked the banking app. My accounts were balanced, the frozen transactions reversed, Part of the money my family had drained had returned. But it wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about principle, protection, and the life I was building for myself and Mason. For the first time, I felt what it truly meant to be free. No midnight panic calls, no emotional blackmail, no silent expectations. Only peace, clarity, and control. And as Mason's small hand slipped into mine, I whispered softly, almost to myself, "This is what family first really means." Not the one my parents preached, not the one manipulated by guilt or obligation, but a family built on love, respect, and boundaries. I finally slept through the night, unburdened, knowing I had done the hardest thing and the right thing.